I stood there in the pre-dawn light, my bathrobe fluttering in the cold morning breeze, staring at what felt like a desecration. It was a chemical assault on my soul, the smell of industrial solvent burning the back of my throat as I looked at the passenger side window of my 1965 Rolls-Royce Silver Cloud. Tucked under the wiper blade, flapping aggressively like a dying bird, was a neon orange sticker that screamed purely of bureaucratic malice. It wasn't a friendly note from a neighbor, it was a declaration of war from the Oak Haven Heights Homeowners Association, claiming my vehicle was abandoned debris and threatening immediate removal. This wasn't just a car to me. It was the only thing keeping the silence of my empty house from crushing my lungs, the only thing that made sense since my wife, Margaret, faded away in a hospice bed just 6 months prior. To understand the rage that was slowly boiling in my gut, you have to understand the silence. I'm Arthur Vance, a 62-year-old retired structural engineer for Lockheed Martin, a man used to the deafening roar of jet turbines and the chaotic precision of hangars. But after Margaret passed, the silence in my life became a physical weight, a heavy blanket of grief that made even breathing feel like manual labor. I found the Rolls in a barn 3 counties over, our aristocratic ghost buried under 30 years of rat droppings and neglect, looking less like a vehicle and more like a tragedy. But I saw the lines, I saw the dignity beneath the rust, and I dragged it home to my driveway because I needed something to fix, something that, unlike my wife's cancer, actually had a solution. The flatbed had barely unhooked the chains, dropping the massive British chassis onto my concrete, when I heard the distinct, sharp click of high heels on pavement, a sound that in the suburbs usually signals the approach of someone who believes they are the main character in everyone else's life. I turned to see Patricia Sterling, the self-appointed queen of our neighborhood and the HOA president, a woman who wore business casual like it was tactical armor and wielded her clipboard with the lethal intent of a samurai sword. She was staring at the Rolls not with curiosity, but with the cold, calculating look of a predator assessing the caloric value of a wounded gazelle. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice dripping with that saccharine sweetness that barely masks the poison underneath. "We have aesthetic standards in Oak Haven, and while I appreciate a vintage hobby, this carcass is a violation of Section 4, Paragraph C regarding unsightly refuse." I tried to be polite, I really did, explaining that it was a restoration project, a piece of history, a work in art in progress, but she was already taking photos with her phone, her eyes scanning my property, my garage, my life, with a terrifying intensity. "You have 72 hours to remove it, or we will have it towed at your expense," she said, flashing a smile that didn't reach her eyes before turning on her heel, marching back to her pristine white Lexus SUV. That was the first shot fired, but as I watched her drive away, circling the block once, then twice, slowing down each time to stare at my house, I realized this wasn't about the car. It was about something else, something I couldn't quite see yet, like a structural fracture hidden deep within a fuselage. The harassment began with the precision of a military campaign. The orange sticker was just the opening salvo. By the end of the first week, I had received 4 separate citations in the mail, each one more absurd than the last. Citation 1. Commercial vehicle storage, because I had an engine hoist delivered. Citation 2. Noise violation, for running an air compressor at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday. Citation 3. Improper waste disposal, because I had left a cardboard box of parts near my recycling bin for 20 minutes. Citation 4. Unapproved exterior modification, claiming the Rolls, parked in my driveway, changed the visual architecture of the home. I'm a man who spent 40 years dealing with FAA regulations and military specs, so I know paperwork. I know that rules are often just weapons used by small people to feel tall. I started digging into the Oregon state statutes, specifically regarding vehicle restoration, and I found the hobbyist exemption, a beautiful piece of legislation that allows for the restoration of vehicles over 25 years old on private property, as long as it's not a commercial enterprise. I felt a surge of triumph, a little spark of the old Arthur coming back, as I printed out the law, highlighted the relevant sections, and mailed it to the HOA board, the property management company, and Patricia herself. I thought that would end it. I thought logic and law would prevail, but I was naive. The day after my appeal letter arrived, I was under the hood, wrestling with a seized alternator, the smell of penetrating oil mixing with the scent of pine from the trees Margaret had planted, when Frank, my next-door neighbor, walked over with a beer in his hand and a look of genuine concern on his face. Frank was a good guy, a retired plumber who kept to himself, but he looked spooked. "Arthur," he said, keeping his voice low, "that Sterling woman was at my door yesterday." "Let me guess," I grunted, wrenching a bolt loose. "Asking if I'm running an illegal chop shop?" "Worse," Frank said, taking a nervous sip of his lager. "She was asking about your finances. She wanted to know if you were having trouble paying the mortgage since Margaret passed. She asked if the car was a desperate attempt to make money. She had a notepad, Arthur. She wasn't just asking. She was building a file." A cold chill went down my spine that had nothing to do with the wind. This wasn't about aesthetic standards anymore. Patricia Sterling was a real estate agent, a high-volume flipper who had her face on every bus bench in the county, and she was probing my financial weak points. I went inside and pulled up her profile online, scrolling through her listings, and noticed a pattern. She specialized in distressed properties, homes bought for pennies on the dollar from estates, from divorces, from widows. The escalation was rapid and brutal. 2 days later, a city code enforcement officer showed up, a tired-looking man named Officer Reynolds, who told me they'd received 12 anonymous complaints in 48 hours about a commercial salvage operation running out of my garage. He looked around, saw my one car, my organized tools, my clean floor, and sighed, shaking his head. "Look, Mr. Vance, this is clearly a hobby, and a nice one at that. But whoever is calling this and is trying to weaponize my department against you. Is it a woman named Patricia?" I asked. Reynolds didn't answer, but the look in his eyes told me everything I needed to know. He marked the case as unfounded and left, but the damage was done. She was escalating to government agencies. Then came the letter from my insurance company. They were canceling my homeowner's policy effective immediately due to undeclared high-risk commercial activity involving hazardous materials. I spent 4 hours on the phone, screaming into the void of a call center, explaining that 5 quarts of oil and a can of brake cleaner did not constitute a hazmat site. I managed to get a reinstatement, but my premium doubled pending an inspection. I was drowning in paperwork, fighting a war on 3 fronts while trying to bring a dead British engine back to life, and I was exhausted. One evening, as the sun dipped below the tree line, casting long, melancholy shadows across the neighborhood, I saw her white Lexus creeping down the street again. She stopped right in front of my house. I walked to the window, watching through the blinds. She wasn't looking at the car this time. She was looking at the house. She was holding her phone up, framing the shot, imagining a for sale sign in the yard. That's when it hit me. She didn't care about the Rolls-Royce. The car was just the leverage. She wanted the house. She knew I was a grieving widower. She assumed I was weak, broken, and financially unstable. She was trying to stress me out, to bleed me dry with fines and legal threats until I folded and sold the house to her for a fraction of its value, just to make the pain stop. She thought she was hunting a wounded animal. She didn't realize she was poking a sleeping engineer. The war moved from the driveway to the dining room table. I cleared away the few sentimental trinkets Margaret had left behind, a ceramic bowl, a vase of dried lavender, and turned the table into a command center. Stacks of paper rose like skyscrapers. HOA bylaws, state property codes, county zoning maps, and a dossier on Patricia Sterling that was growing thicker by the hour. I felt like I was back at Lockheed, hunting for a microscopic hairline fracture in a wing strut, the kind of flaw that could bring down the whole plane if you didn't catch it in time. I needed help, legal help, the kind that couldn't be bullied by a suburban tyrant. I called Sam Cohen, the estate attorney who had helped us with Margaret's will. Sam was a bulldog in a cheap suit, a man who hated bullies more than he loved billable hours. When I laid out the timeline, the fines, the code enforcement, the insurance tampering, he went quiet on the line. "Arthur," he said, his voice gravelly, "this isn't just harassment. This is tortious interference." "But why? Why you? Why now?" A Rolls-Royce in a driveway is annoying to some, sure, but she's spending serious capital to crush you. There's a motive we're missing. The answer came from the most unlikely source. Mrs. Higgins, the 80-year-old neighborhood gossip who walked her ancient pug past my house every morning at 7 a.m. sharp. She waved me over to the sidewalk one morning, looking over her shoulder like she was passing state secrets. "Arthur," she whispered, clutching her cardigan. That awful woman was at the Davidsons' house yesterday, and the Millers the day before. She's offering them money. Money for what? I asked, wiping grease from my hands. To sign a petition, Mrs. Higgins hissed. A petition declaring you mentally unfit. She's telling people that since Margaret passed, you've lost your grip. That you're hoarding junk, that you're shouting at invisible people, that the chemicals in the garage have affected your brain. My blood ran cold. This was the nuclear option. In Oregon, if a homeowner is deemed a danger to the community due to mental instability, an HOA can petition for an emergency injunction, sometimes even forced removal or a mandatory sale. She wasn't just trying to annoy me. She was trying to institutionalize me. 2 days later, the doorbell rang. 2 social workers from Adult Protective Services stood there, looking uncomfortable. They had received an anonymous report detailed with terrifying specificity, claiming I was living in squalor, starving myself, and exhibiting violent outbursts. I invited them in, made them tea, showed them my spotless kitchen, my organized pantry, and the spreadsheet I kept for the Rolls restoration. They left within 20 minutes, apologizing profusely, but the humiliation burned. She had weaponized the state against my grief. But Sam Cohen had been digging. He called me late on a Thursday night. Check your email, Arthur. I found the smoking gun. I opened the attachment. It was a PDF of a proposed zoning change filed with the County Planning Commission. The document outlined a plan to rezone 3 specific residential lots in Oak Haven Heights for mixed-use light commercial development, essentially a boutique strip mall. The lots were mine, Frank's, and the Davidsons. And the applicant? A shell company called Sterling Development LLC. She doesn't just want the commission on your house, Sam explained, his voice vibrating with excitement. She wants the land. Your lot is the corner anchor. Without your property, the shopping center can't be built. She needs you gone, and she needs to buy the place cheap before the rezoning goes public and the property value triples. It all clicked. The harassment, the attempt to paint me as crazy, the pressure on the neighbors. It was a concerted effort to drive down the value, force a distressed sale, and steal a multi-million-dollar commercial opportunity. She was trying to gaslight a structural engineer about the stability of his own foundation. I spent the next 3 nights installing high-definition cameras around my property, disguised in birdhouses and drain pipes. If she wanted a show, I'd give her a movie. The trap was set the following Tuesday. I left the garage door open, the Rolls gleaming inside, its chrome bumper reflecting the world like a funhouse mirror. I positioned a few empty boxes labeled hazmat, actually filled with old newspapers, near the property line. Sure enough, at 10:45 p.m., the motion sensors chimed. On my monitor, I watched Patricia Sterling creep onto my property. She wasn't wearing her realtor blazer. She was in dark sweats. She crept up to the hazmat boxes, pulled out a digital camera, and then, unbelievably, she pulled a container of motor oil out of her own bag and poured it onto the grass next to the boxes. She was framing me for environmental contamination. I hit the record button, zooming in on her face, illuminated by the flash of her own camera. My heart was pounding, not with fear, but with the cold, hard rhythm of justice. She was planting evidence. She had crossed the line from civil harassment to criminal fraud. But she wasn't done. The next morning, my mail carrier, a nice guy named Steve, knocked on the door. He looked shaken. "Mr. Vance, I shouldn't tell you this, but I saw Mrs. Sterling near your mailbox yesterday. After she left, I checked. Your box was empty. But I know for a fact I delivered a certified letter from the County Planning Commission to you." She was intercepting my mail. She was stealing the official notices about the zoning change so I wouldn't know to attend the hearings. That's a federal crime. Tampering with the U.S. mail is a felony. I called Sam. I have her on video dumping oil. I have a witness for the mail theft. And I have the zoning documents. "Don't call the police yet," Sam said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "The annual HOA general meeting is in 3 days. If you arrest her now, she makes bail and spins a story. You need to kill her credibility publicly. You need to destroy her power base. Do you have the Rolls running?" "I'm close," I said, looking at the massive engine block. "I need 1 more day." "Get it running," Sam commanded. "We're going to make an entrance." The night of the Oak Haven Heights annual general meeting, the community center was packed to the rafters. The air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and tension. Patricia Sterling sat at the head table, flanked by her sycophantic board members. looking every bit the queen bee holding court. She was projecting a PowerPoint slide about neighborhood beautification, pointing to a graph that showed property values dipping, subtly implying that certain elements were dragging us all down. I waited outside in the parking lot, sitting in the driver's seat of the Silver Cloud. The leather, conditioned and soft, creaked as I shifted. The walnut dashboard gleamed under the streetlights. I turned the key. The V8 engine didn't roar. It whispered, a low, powerful hum of British engineering brought back from the dead. It was the sound of resilience. I drove the Rolls right up to the double glass doors of the community center, the headlights flooding the lobby. I killed the engine, stepped out in my best suit, the one I wore to Margaret's funeral, and walked in. The room went silent. Sam Cohen was already there, standing by the projector, holding a laptop. Mr. Vance, Patricia sneered into the microphone, her voice echoing unpleasantly. You are not on the agenda. And frankly, considering the mental health concerns raised by your neighbors, I don't think this is the appropriate venue for an outburst. I'm not here for an outburst, Patricia, I said, my voice steady, projecting to the back of the room without a microphone. I'm here for a presentation on property values. I nodded to Sam. The screen behind Patricia flickered. Her beautification graph disappeared, replaced by the high-definition footage from my security camera. The room gasped as they watched their HOA president, in 4K resolution, pouring motor oil onto my lawn. Patricia froze. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. This is Patricia Sterling fabricating environmental hazards 3 nights ago, I narrated calmly. Click. The next slide. A scan of the zoning application with her signature as the manager of Sterling Development LLC. And this, I continued, pacing slowly toward the stage, is the commercial rezoning application she filed for my home, Frank's home, and the Davidsons' home. She isn't protecting your property values. She's artificially suppressing them, driving us to sell cheap so she can bulldoze our memories and build a strip mall. The room erupted. It wasn't just murmurs anymore, it was shouting. People stood up, pointing fingers. Frank jumped up. She offered me cash. She told me Arthur was dangerous. Patricia was standing now, knocking over her water glass. This is fake. This is digital manipulation. He's insane. He's grieving and delusional. And finally, I said, cutting through her panic, we have the matter of federal law. I pointed to the back of the room. The double doors opened again. This time, it wasn't a vintage car. It was 2 postal inspectors in federal windbreakers, followed by a sheriff's deputy. Patricia Sterling, the lead inspector announced, his voice booming. We have a warrant for your arrest regarding the theft and destruction of United States mail, wire fraud, and falsifying government documents. The silence that followed was heavy, absolute, and satisfying. The click of the handcuffs as they secured her wrists behind her back was the loudest sound in the world. As they let her out, she looked at me. Really looked at me, not as a victim, but as the man who had just dismantled her entire life with the same patience used to rebuild a carburetor. The car looks good, Arthur, she spat, a final, venomous attempt at sarcasm. It runs even better, I replied. Patricia pleaded guilty to avoid a federal trial. She lost her real estate license, was fined $50,000 in restitution, and sentenced to 18 months in a minimum security facility. The Oak Haven Heights HOA was dissolved and reformed with a charter that specifically protected hobbyist rights. But the real ending wasn't in the courtroom. It was 6 months later. I was in the garage, teaching a Saturday workshop I started called Wrenches and Wisdom. Half a dozen neighborhood kids were there, learning how to change oil, how to gap spark plugs, how to use their hands to fix things instead of just swiping screens. The Rolls sat in the corner, fully restored, a silver monument to persistence. A young couple had moved into Patricia's old house. Irony has a funny sense of humor. The husband, a young guy named Dave, walked over with his 5-year-old daughter. Mr. Vance, he asked, I heard you the guy to talk to about engines. My dad left me an old Camaro, but I don't know where to start. I looked at the grease on my hands, then at the wide eyes of his daughter. I wiped my hands on a rag and smiled, a genuine smile, the kind Margaret used to love. Well, Dave, I said, the first step is to listen to it. The machine will tell you what it needs. As the sun set, I took the Rolls out for a drive. The window was down, the cool Oregon air rushing in. I wasn't just driving a car, I was driving through the grief, out the other side. I had saved my home, I had saved my dignity, and in fighting for my own sanity, I had saved the neighborhood. But as the engine purred, I couldn't help but wonder about the nature of what we call community. We pay fees, we sign contracts, we mow lawns to a specific height, all to maintain an illusion of order. But when does protecting property values become a license to destroy human value? At what point does the pursuit of a perfect neighborhood justify the destruction of a neighbor? Patricia was a villain, yes, but she was empowered by a system that prioritizes aesthetics over ethics. We cheered when she was arrested, but how many of us turned a blind eye when she was just enforcing the rules? How many Patricius are out there right now, measuring grass height with a ruler while plotting to steal the ground beneath your feet? Justice was served, but the question remains, who is really watching the watchers?